Hey folks, it's Dr. Gilchrist. I hope that you are having a wonderful week. I hope you had a really good time learning about job satisfaction and organizational commitment and other attitudes and behaviors. As you can kind of see from this slide, we are going to focus this week on productive and counterproductive workplace behaviors. One thing that I will mention that I have decided to add to these YouTube playlists to help you, um, I've added TED Talks and I've added other potential things to help you learn a little bit more about these phenomena in particular, since I will not have the opportunity to really tell you about these in class. And additionally, focusing on people who are experts in this field can help us supplement the material a little bit more. So here's what we're going to focus on in this particular lecture. So we're going to focus on what influences productive behaviors. We're going to talk about human factors. This previously used to be referred to as ergonomics, and it's basically how can we design different products, different instructions, different materials to make them be used more effectively and more efficiently to help manage productivity. We'll talk about organizational citizenship behaviors. I will have another lecture on that pretty soon. And we will talk about counterproductive workplace behaviors. In particular, I'm going to focus on aggression, sabotage, and on theft. So when I was growing up in the 1990s, especially as I was becoming a teenager, there was a very common trope and a very common phrase referred to as going postal. So this is a case where, especially in the 90s, it was not that uncommon to hear stories about employees who were disgruntled. The word was always disgruntled. And because of their anger and their frustration at the workplace, especially if they had recently been laid off, downsized, or fired, the very common trope was that that disappointed, disgruntled employee would basically come back and hurt or even in some cases kill their coworkers. Today, we actually consider this workplace rage. This is an extreme example of counterproductive workplace behaviors. So let's look at a couple of different examples of workplace rage and explore the going postal phrase in particular. So as a good first step, it's always helpful to check Wikipedia. Going postal is an American English slang phrase referring to becoming extremely and uncontrollably angry, often to the point of violence, and usually in a workplace environment. The expression derives from a series of incidents from 1986 onward in which United States Postal Service workers shot and killed managers, fellow workers, and members of the police or general public in acts of mass murder. Between 1970 and 1997, more than 40 people were killed by current or former employees in at least 20 incidents of workplace rage. Between 1986 and 2011, workplace shootings happened roughly twice a year, with an average of 11.8 people killed. The earliest use of the phrase going postal, hey, it's my state, December 17th, 1993, in the St. Petersburg Times. The symposium was sponsored by the U.S. Postal Service, which has seen so many outbursts in some circles. Excessive stress is known as going postal. 35 people have been killed in 11 post office shootings since 1983. The USPS does not approve of the term going postal and has made attempts to stop people from using the saying. Some postal workers, however, feel it has earned its place. Now, they do have a list of killings. Workplace rage is not necessarily limited to the Postal Service. You can even find these instances of workplace rage in academia. There's a really good long read on the case of the University of Alabama Huntsville shooting in 2010. This happened because a biology professor basically had been denied tenure, and during a biology meeting or department meeting, she basically killed many of her colleagues. There's a really good long form story on it. I would encourage you to read it if you're kind of interested in true crime. Um, but you can kind of see that there are a lot of links here. But these are all very clear instances of workplace rage. I have also heard of stories about graduate students basically seriously hurting or even murdering their professors because of difficulties with a thesis, a dissertation, or things like that. These are really, really rare if you look at the incidents of workplace shootings that were posted kind of in that Wikipedia article. These are incredibly rare. Most people do not go into these. Most of your coworkers are not going to hurt you, but these are extreme examples of counterproductive work behavior. Okay, so now with all of that darkness out of the way, let's talk a little bit about productive work behavior before we start talking about counterproductive work behavior. Okay, so this kind of goes without saying. For organizations to succeed, employees have to work efficiently. Now, of course, when we're talking about organizations, we are ultimately talking about the bottom line, which means that enhanced productivity and making more money is definitely the goal. I think that sometimes this push for productivity is not always very good for the mental health of your employees. In particular, if you don't mind my saying so, I find the current push for productivity in the midst of a very anxiety inducing and stressful time, such as the one that we're in, that is definitely a form of trauma. I find that push for productivity. Like, don't worry, Shakespeare produced King Lear while he was in quarantine during the plague. Well, that's great. I'm not Shakespeare. This push for productivity, to the extent of everything else, I don't always think is very good for employees. So I'm hoping that, especially in times like these right now, that we're doing our best to try to find that balance between trying to be as effective as we possibly can, but at the same time, respecting our mental health and understanding that it's okay not to push so hard sometimes. But generally, organizations are going to push really hard for productivity. Their productivity is enhanced. That enhances goods and services. That affects the economy. It's part of the reason why a couple of weeks ago you saw the president really trying to push for people to go back to work around Easter, because there's this nervousness that if we don't get back on the ball, we're not going to be able to help the economy. And again, I think it's a balance between what's more important to you. Is it productivity? Is it about profit? Is it about the economy? Or is it about people? And folks, you know me, you probably have a pretty good understanding of which way I lie in the economy versus people aspect. But that's another matter. So what's really critical for productive performance? Well, first of all, motivation is going to be really important. You can't be productive, you can't do your best work if you're not motivated to do it. And additionally, your own personal abilities and environmental conditions matter too. If you don't know how to code, and coding is a part of your job and it helps you be more productive, and you don't know how, you're not going to be able to. So we're going to talk about some of the different factors that affect productivity at work. So let's talk about motivation and how it directly affects performance. So motivation can either have an internal or an external source. One of the things that we talked about with respect to motivation is that people are motivated by different things. Some of y'all are motivated by getting a good grade. Some of you are motivated by the act of gaining knowledge and the act of learning. And neither is better than the other. Everybody's motivated by different things. And what's really critical is not whether it's internal or external, but is it sufficient motivation to get you to work? Generally, beyond having an internal or an external source of motivation from individuals, organizations will try to do their best to enhance that motivation by modifying the work environment, by using things like reinforcements, by motivators, as we talked about in Hertzberg's two-factor theory. So looking for opportunities for promotion, looking for opportunities for growth and good connections with coworkers. No, I don't know why that square keeps popping up. Let's pause and find out. Okay. So one of the other things that will absolutely affect job performance is your ability. Now, here's the thing. If you've done your job analysis like you were supposed to do, this should not be too much of an issue. Why? Because you did a job analysis, you determined what KSAOs were critical for hiring somebody for this job. So ideally, somebody in this job should have the abilities that you specified. So if you need somebody who is a programmer, do a job analysis. Make sure they have the ability to program. And that way, you can hire somebody who already has the ability. Again, it's another important reason why job analysis is critical. If you know what knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics an employee needs to work at this particular position in your organization, you will definitely get good performance because you will hire somebody that has those qualities. Additionally, if it turns out that there are some new skills that people need to learn to have, you can train for those. You can train your employees to either enhance or build new skills. I like to think of this time right now as a weird sort of type of on-the-job training. I've never delivered an online class, and now I'm learning how. Okay. So what abilities seem to be related to job performance? Well, it depends on the job. Some of these skills are very specific. I don't necessarily need to know how to do programming to do my job, but for certain types of experiments that I run, programming has definitely been an asset and not a hindrance. But I'm not saying that every professor needs to know how to code. So there are some specific skills, but general overall cognitive abilities are very strong predictors of job performance across the board. Generally, the better match between the job abilities that you have and the job abilities required for the job, the better job satisfaction you are going to have. And generally, people tend to be more, a happy worker is not necessarily a more productive worker, but job satisfaction can be another motivating force that allows people to be more productive. Your personality traits will also affect job performance. Generally, high motivation is associated with higher level cognitive abilities and skills. And additionally, other personality factors include our big 5-factor model of personality. So for those of you that have had personality classes or you remember general psychology, remember that our big 5-factor model includes conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. Now, generally, there is not going to be like one personality trait that will work well in all jobs. Generally, for example, if you're extroverted, you're probably going to have an easier time doing a retail job than somebody who's a bit more introverted. Now, likewise, generally, certain jobs tend to cater more to introverts. A lot of academics are introverts. I'm certainly not, but I notice that a lot of people that I work with are. A certain level of neuroticism might be important. A certain level of conscientiousness will be important. So certain personality dimensions are going to fit certain jobs better than others. So you have to think a little bit about the person job fit. I would say across the board, conscientiousness is probably pretty important for any job. Having conscientiousness means that you are careful, you are thoughtful, you are thinking about things like deadlines, you're trying to plan, you're organized. In general, conscientiousness is an important asset and can help you do well in just about any job. What are some other characteristics that affect job performance? Well, one is a locus of control. So, do you believe that you have control over your environment and what things happen to you? Or do you believe that the things that happen to you are due to fate, chance, luck, things like that? Generally, we're going to find that there is a small relationship between a locus of control and performance. Generally, people who have an internal locus of control, they believe they decide their fate, they make their own luck, and that their actions will affect the environment. They tend to perform a little bit better and they tend to work a little bit harder. Interestingly enough, and I think this is really important, there is no relationship, or at the very most, a minimal one, between age and productivity. So, as we kind of talked about, earlier on in the semester, age is technically a protected class. You cannot discriminate against somebody due to their age. And it's a very, very common trope, at least here in the United States and other Western countries, that aging is associated with decreased productivity, decreased abilities, and things like that. And it turns out that that is not true at all. Generally, older workers are not necessarily any less productive than younger workers are. And in fact, based on what we've learned about organizational commitment, they're often more committed to the organization and they're far more loyal to the organization than a younger worker might be. Generally, older workers perform slightly better on tasks. As I said, they have greater organizational commitment, and research has found that they engage in more organizational citizenship behaviors. They help each other in and coworkers and the organization in ways that are not specified as part of the job. So they kind of go above and beyond the call of duty. They have fewer accidents, and they also engage in less withdrawal behaviors. They're less likely to show up absent at work. They're less likely to be tardy. So this idea that older workers are a load or a weight on the organization is untrue. Now, environmental conditions will also affect performance as well. If your environment does not support productivity, you're going to create constraints. So, for example, there are certain things that workplaces can do to basically either enhance or basically create organizational constraints. So for example, employees, we do find that when employers allow employees to listen to music with their headphones on, that actually ends up boosting performance. There are other things that an organization can do that might actually hinder job performance. So it's really important to think about what your employees need and things that they might like to have that can help boost that productivity. And this is where job characteristics theory comes back into play. People tend to be motivated by the intrinsic factors of the job. Remember that while people like getting paid more, that is a short-term fix. If you want to get people to be more motivated to do work, to be more productive, and do well, enhance the intrinsic aspects of the job that motivates people. So just as a quick review of the job characteristics theory, remember that every job is described by these 5 different core dimensions: skill variety, task identity and task significance, and autonomy and feedback. So skill variety, does your job enable you to do a variety of tasks or just one task all the time? Task identity, so Is this something, are you basically producing a whole unified product, or are you producing part of a product? Can you see specifically your creation in this whole unified project? So, for example, when I write a lecture, that has very high task identity because I create the whole product. If you are screwing on a toothpaste cap at a factory, you have very low task identity. How important is this task? Is it high or low in task significance? Do you have autonomy? And do you get good feedback? These 5 characteristics that are intrinsic to the job will contribute to 3 different critical psychological states. So we get states like meaningfulness, responsibility, and knowledge. And when you have these 3 different psychological states, we basically get very specific personal and work outcomes. So we get internal motivation, quality performance, satisfaction with work, and low absenteeism and turnover, all of which are going to help enhance productivity. So if we can change aspects of the job that are intrinsic, if we can introduce some more variety, if we can make people feel like the work they're doing, they can actually see the whole finished product. If we're giving people feedback, if we're letting people have some independence in how they choose to work, we can enhance that productivity and that motivation. So how do we use this to enhance task performance? So basically, you can calculate the potential for motivation by combining scores on the 5 core dimensions. And so what we can do is we can look at what is called a motivation potential score, or MPS. So what we do is we take the average of skill variety, task identity, and task significance. So we sum each of those up and divide by 3, multiply that by autonomy, and multiply that by feedback. Now notice that if any one of these is 0, very similarly to that expectancy theory that we talked about, the valence, instrumentality, and expectancy, if any one of these is 0, you have no motivating potential. So if you're not getting autonomy, if you're not getting feedback, or if it turns out that you have no skill variety, task variety, or task significance, because these summate, if any one of these is 0, your motivation will be 0. One of the other things that we can do to increase jobs motivating potential is you have to consider somebody's growth need strength. Give people an opportunity to grow. Give people an opportunity to progress. Give them opportunities to learn new skills and enhance their abilities. And if you can do that, you can increase the motivating potential of that job. Now, what are some of the consequences if there are organizational constraints, if there are things that the organization decides are not helpful? Generally, employees will be prevented from using their skills. This will hurt their performance. The greater constraints that you have in a job also will hurt employee well-being. If they feel like there's no autonomy or task identity, or if they're not getting good feedback, all of these are major organizational constraints. They basically deflate the motivating potential of a job, and you will see things like increased job dissatisfaction and frustration and possibly turnover. You'll have people quit. So we'll talk some more about this next time.